Hello, this is Glenn Crothers from the Louisville Jazz Society, and today it is my great pleasure to talk to Chip, the Grammy Award-winning saxophonist, Chip
Oh,
McNeill, professor
thank
and
you.
chair of jazz studies at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Chip will be leading a quartet of masterful players and special guests, I hear, at the next Louisville Jazz Society's Master Series concert on Sunday, October 26th at 7 p.m. at the Café. It's
hmm
wonderful to have this opportunity to talk to you, Chip, about your career and about your forthcoming show here in Louisville.
Well, thank you, Glenn. It's very nice to meet you, and I thank everybody at the Louisville Jazz Society for thinking of me and having me down for the Jazz Masters series. I'm really looking forward to it.
As are we. So
Great.
I always find it interesting to learn about how musicians come to jazz. So could you talk
Mhm.
a little bit about your musical origins? Why did you want to play jazz, and more specifically, why the saxophone?
Well, probably my father for both of those, to be honest with you. He was a saxophone player and played all the way to his passing day at 91. So he had a long life in music and started early on. And he got me interested in music early on. I started originally as a pianist, and I still play piano quite a bit. But then I got into playing clarinet and saxophone through him and recordings. And my mother was a singer also. And so they had a life in music before I ever came along. And so they had a lot of records around the house when I was little. So I was just constantly involved in music and listening from a very early age. And I just got into jazz. I can remember the first time I ever heard a Charlie Parker record and a John Coltrane record, and it hooked me for playing the tenor saxophone. Was what hooked me was John Coltrane. I just heard his sound and I was like, oh, I was fascinated. So that's really how I got the early start. And then I continued on into college. I went to North Texas State University where I met Phil DeGreg, wonderful pianist, and we actually played quite a bit there in school. And then I also attended the University of Miami and got a great start. Had met a plethora of wonderful musicians there who I've interacted with all my life. And then I went on the road with the Woody Herman band when Woody was still alive, and then right at the end of his life, and played with that band for a couple of years. Then I was with Maynard Ferguson for about 7 years as his music director, and with Arturo Sandoval, with whom I won the Grammy that you mentioned before, and recorded quite a bit with him. And I was his music director for 7 or 8 years, and Doc Severinsen later on. But I've toured with a lot of people. Nat Adderley, I knew through the years, and Ira Sullivan and Red Rodney. So just a lot of different jazz players.
Well,
Yeah.
let's step back a little bit. And, most musicians that I've talked to say high school. I played in the high school band or something, but you just
Mhm.
jumped over that.
Yeah, well, I didn't really have one. My high school was so small. I came from a little small town here in Illinois, and we just didn't really. It was very small, and it was just a concert band type of thing, and it was kind of a, half of a concert band.
Right.
And so I didn't really start that way. Like I said, my father started me on piano, and then I got into the clarinet. And about maybe my second year of high school, I went to the band director and said, "Hey, can I play in the band on clarinet?" And so that's how I really kind of got in. And I did play for a year or so, and then I was learning saxophone too at the same time. And I just took to it. And my dad actually took me up to an audition for the Illinois All-State Jazz Band. And since we didn't have a jazz band at all, we barely had a concert band in my little school. So he found out about it somehow and sent a thing in, and I went up and auditioned. And the guy didn't know who I was because they knew all like the young Chicago players and the younger musicians they dealt with through high schools. And I just kind of came out of the blue. But I got in the band and I met some other musicians, young musicians, and that kind of convinced me to go to North Texas early on. So,
That's
yeah.
that's great. Well, let's talk a little bit about how your time at North Texas and University of Miami, both great jazz programs, kind of shaped the
Mhm.
nature of your playing.
Well, I when I did leave to go to North Texas, I was kind of young. I got out of high school when I was 17, and I went down there pretty young. And I got around a lot of great musicians. There were just a lot of terrific players from all over the country. Because at that time, now it's called the University of North Texas, but it was called North Texas State University then. And it was reasonably inexpensive to go to school there, almost nothing. And so you could play a few gigs on a weekend and basically pay your tuition. And then I got some scholarships, and I never had to really pay tuition anyway. But I got working because I got around a lot of other young musicians, that were
Right.
my age. And they had a great program. They had like 10 big bands and all kinds of stuff going on at the time. Leon Breeden was the director then when I got there. And so I played in the 1 o'clock lab band. I got into that. And I just met a lot of great musicians who I would, interact with all through my life. And as I said, Phil DeGreg was one of those.
Right.
And then my parents had my dad had kind of retired from what he was doing at that point, not music, but he had been in another business. And so they moved down to Denton because my mother was from Texas. And so we used to rehearse at their house. I remember with Phil because we had a piano. And so I had Steve Bailey, who's now the chair of bass studies at Berkeley, and he was a young student, and Phil and Dave Miller, who was a drummer that was in the Illinois All-State Jazz Band with here. He had come down since to North Texas, and Tim Reese, who's a really fine saxophone player in New York, plays with the Rolling Stones. He's done a lot of different touring things like I have. And we used to have a band there. And Jim Snidero, another great alto
Right.
player, we just had a group, and we used to rehearse in my parents' living room, and play. Yeah, that was kind of my North Texas thing. And then I
So
finally
what brought you to
left.
Miami?
Well, I got to the end. I got to the almost 4 years. I almost graduated from North Texas, and then I decided I went over one Christmas break. I had some friends that had kind of gone over to Miami. One of which was Steve Bailey, and they kind of said, "Hey, there's a really cool scene over here. Come check it out." So I just went over on a Christmas break to hang out and play a little bit, and I did a session with Rick Margitza, who's a great jazz saxophone player, and a couple other people. And with Seidner, the guy who was running the program there, and just happened to be there. It was like a Saturday or Sunday or something. And he heard me play, and he said, "Hey, would you want to come to school here?" And I said, "Well, I got gigs. I got to get back for New Year's. I have stuff in Dallas, and I didn't even really think about it." And then I went home, and about 4 days later or something, he called me, and he said, "Hey, have you thought about coming to school here?" And I said, "Well, isn't Miami a private university as opposed to North Texas, which was a public university and quite inexpensive?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah, it is." And I said, "Well, how much does it cost to go a semester?" And he said, "Oh, it's about $10,000 or something at that time." And I just kind of laughed. I remember almost doing like a spit take. And I was like, "Yeah, I don't think I can do that." And he said, "Oh, no, no, no. It won't cost you anything. We'll pay for everything." And so I said, "Okay, I'll be there next week." And I left. That was that.
Wow.
They offered to pay for my school. So I went over there, and that's where I met, like I said, Rick Margitza and a lot of other great players through your Andy Snitzer, a lot of great saxophone players. And I don't know, I just decided to go there, and I graduated, ended up graduating from there as an undergrad, and then I went back a few years later after I kind of went on the road. And then I came back and I did a master's and finished my master's there, and that's when I went out with Woody Herman.
Yeah, so you
Yeah,
stepped right out of school and touring
yeah,
with Woody Herman's band. So being on the road,
yeah.
you were like a road warrior for a long part of your career.
Yes, I did a lot of road about 20 some years or 25 years before I ever got into teaching. In fact, I never intended to teach or anything. I was not a music ed person. I just wanted to play.
Yeah.
So, and that's those schools at that time, it was a stepping stone to getting into that because a lot of the young players were being taken from those two places at that time. The Woody Herman Band, Maynard Ferguson, Count Basie, even they were taking players out of the schools directly, and that's what happened to me basically through friends and things. I got connected, and so I went out to play, and then I kind of fell backwards into teaching. That came way later, you know.
Well, we'll come to teach. I want to talk a little bit about some
Yeah.
of the great players that you've had the opportunity to play with.
Oh
Woody
my God.
Herman, Maynard
Yeah.
Ferguson. You were with Maynard Ferguson for like 15 years or something.
Well, not quite that long. I was about 7 or 8 years, I think,
Ah,
something like that. But we did record quite a few CDs back then, 7 or 8 of them, and I wrote a lot of music for him. I got on the band through a friend of mine who called me up right when I was getting off Woody's band, and he called me up out of the blue and he said, "Hey, we're doing a tour to Europe, and we're going to play Ronnie Scott's in London for a couple of weeks and do a recording. And Maynard needs a tenor player and he needs somebody that can write." And I had also been writing a lot when I was at North Texas and Miami too. I got into that even before in high school. I just started writing myself. And so I'd been doing a lot of that. So I said, "Sure, I'll come and do it." And Maynard heard a few of my things, and we recorded them on a record called, or a CD called Live from London. And was at Ronnie Scott's. And that's when I first started with Maine. And yeah.
right. And so Doc Severson and Arturo Sandoval, of
Yep.
course. But
Yeah,
the list
Artur.
goes on, like
Yeah.
Randy and Michael Brecker, and I could go on and
Yeah.
on of some of the great players you played with. I'm always like interacting with those at that level, how does that shape your playing and your approach to the music?
Well, they were all of those people you mentioned have been huge influences on me. I was listening to their music and their recordings. You know, the Brecker brothers, certainly lots of people have checked them out. I just happened to meet them through Miami because Whit Seidner, who was running the program there, and Randy and Mike had gone to school at Indiana University way back when Jerry Coker was running the program. So they had school ties like I do with Phil DeGreg. You know, we just go back a long ways. So I got to meet them. Their grandparents lived in West Palm Beach, so they were always down in the Miami area, and they would have them come play with the band when I was a student. You know, so I got to meet them early on and play with them. Will Lee, another one. Bill Lee, his dad was the dean of the University of Miami School of Music at the time, and so I just got around them, you know. And then I was out playing, and they heard me. That's how Arturo. I was in Miami when he defected from Cuba, and nobody knew who he was. But Whit would have him come play with the band because people had heard, you know, how great he was. We knew him from Irakiri, that great Cuban group,
Right.
and I knew him from that a little bit, and then I got to meet him, and then later he heard me with Maynard on the road, and then he hired me after I got off Maynard's band. So it was just kind of, I can't say there was a plan. I wish I could. It was not planned. It was just who you know and being prepared. You know, I was always practicing and playing and trying to write for people. And a lot of these great artists, you know, like Doc and Maynard and Arturo, they just happened to like my music and what I was doing that way. So that actually helped forward my career a lot.
And you were doing arranging for these guys as well, right? Many of these
Yes,
guys.
all through the time. That's why I was the music director because I was arranging and writing a lot of things for them. I did a lot for Maynard. I did a lot for Arturo, including our orchestra things that we recorded. He did a HBO movie called For Love of Country, which was basically his life story that starred Andy Garcia and Andy used to come out when we did the touring for that movie. When it came out, I wrote some of the orchestra arrangements and stuff for that. He used to come out and play congas with us. He loved to try to play, you know, and so he was kind of an amateur conga player. Very nice man, you know, well, lovely, and it was a lot of fun. We just had a lot of great people like that I met through the years, and from touring all over the world, you know, with those guys, we went all over, not just the United States, but all over the world. So got to meet a lot of great musicians in Europe and Far East, everywhere. India,
Yeah.
we went to India a couple times with Maynard, and so yeah,
I
it was a
like
lot of
that. I
fun.
like that combination. You know, you're in the right place at the right time, but then also being prepared. You know, you're ready
Yes.
to step into that role.
Right. I constantly was working, and that's why I went to school. You know, I wanted to be around other players, my peers that were interested in the same things and working hard at it. We all had kind of the same goal. We wanted to get on the road and play, and with our groups and with other people's groups. And was fortunate enough to do both all through my career. I do more with my own groups these days, like I said, than you know the other part of my career. But it's been great. You know, I've had relationships with people for 40, 50 years, you know, that I still get to play with every now and then. And that's a real blast. It's a lot of
Yeah.
fun. That's why I'm really looking forward to this show.
So you balanced this playing career, as you said, you backed into sort of being a jazz
Hmm.
educator. You
Hmm.
taught and run jazz programs, what at Virginia Tech, Florida International, and now, of course, at University of Illinois. How has
Hmm.
teaching and your students playing shaped your approach to playing? And how do you balance the demands of the academic life with the playing career?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll start with that. The end of your question, the last question. The balancing act is something you have to learn through time. And I did. When I came into teaching, I was still on the road a lot with Arturo when I got to Virginia Tech. My wife at the time really got a job there. We were living in New York. And so we moved down to Blacksburg basically for her job. And then they heard about me and they asked me to take over the jazz program there because the guy that had been there, Joe Kennedy, had left. He was a great jazz violinist and he retired. And so they approached me, and I said, "Well, I'm still, you know, really going out on the road a lot." But they were okay with it. They just wanted to kind of get a start. And I said, "Okay, well, I'll do that." So I was there maybe 3 days of the week, and then I'd fly out on a Thursday and come back on a Monday. And I did that almost the whole time I was at Tech. But I was able to build a curriculum. I learned about that. I knew what to do because I'd had really great training at North Texas and Miami as far as curriculum and what I could teach. And because I was a pianist, I had a lot of experience with that, so I could teach a lot of different things and writing as well. And so that's how I did that. And then I went to Florida International for just a year, and then I came up here. I heard about this gig and started this. And this was a real challenge because I started this from scratch, the one at Illinois. It's gone on now almost 25 years,
Hmm.
and we built it into a really nice program. Learning from my students has been a real something I didn't expect because they always try things that maybe I wouldn't think of. They keep you fresh.
Yeah.
It's the same reason Miles Davis always changed bands, quite often, every 5 or 6 years because he wanted to play with younger players. He could have played with his peers his whole life, but he just decided, hey, I don't want to really hear Hank Mobley anymore. I want to hear somebody fresh. And it's kind of the same thing with my students, except it just happens through the process of teaching and them learning. And last night I just played a gig last night with my students. I play with my graduate students a lot around here and undergrads too, and just to get them out and give them some experience from my end, but I also learn from them just things that they do, how they react on the bandstand that would be something I might not think of,
Do they
and
bring
also their interests are different than mine too,
That's what I was wondering. Do they bring sort of, right now in jazz, hip hop is having like an influence on jazz.
right.
Do they bring those things to the table and shape what you do?
Sure, of course, all the time. They're constantly bringing just new things into music. I have a student right now who's going to give a recital next week on Hindustani music. Most of it's kind of a blending of jazz and Hindustani music. I actually did some of that with Maynard, 20 years ago, and he had heard some of my stuff. But this young man is now really off into this, and he has a group that of his own that's really off into that music. Hip hop, certainly, reggae, ska. I've kind of been through those different kinds of bands that were all brought forward by my students, and they're kind of doing a whole blending, as jazz has always been a melting pot of different styles and
Right.
grooves, and yet it still has a basis, and I try to at least give them the basis from which they're creating, and so hopefully if I can help them forward it that way, that's great.
Cool. That's great. Let's talk a little bit about the upcoming LJS Masters series gig. Can you tell me a little
Okay.
bit about the quartet that you'll be playing with?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned Phil DeGray a couple of times, and that's because Phil and I we met at North Texas State, and back in the late '70s. And we've been playing on and off through the years, a fair amount. We kind of lost touch when we both got into academia and we were teaching and we were just busy,
Right.
even though we weren't that far apart when I ended up here at Illinois and he was in Cincinnati. But we played a few gigs through the years, just once in a while when we could. But I know Phil is retired now, so I know he's trying to get out playing more. And I'm kind of at that point. I'm about to the end of my academic career too, frankly. And so I'm just trying to get out and do more playing. And so this is going to be a lot of fun to kind of reconnect with Phil.
Yeah.
I had him here at Illinois about a year, I don't know, a year or two ago, and he was doing a duo with a Brazilian guitarist, and that was really fun. And we got to play together, all of us. So that was fun. And Jeremy, I've played with quite a bit through the Steve Ali Big Band over at the Jazz Kitchen in Indianapolis.
As Jeremy
And
Allen, the
I've
bass
known
player, right?
Jeremy Allen, the bass player,
Yeah.
and he's been the bass teacher at IU for quite some time. And as I said, he was possibly at a point maybe going to be our bass teacher here at U of I. Just didn't work out, and he ended up at IU. So, and I know he's had a wonderful career there, and he's been a dean and all kinds of things. But I think he's kind of same spot. He's kind of out playing more now and a little less involved in the academic thing, just as his career has gone forward. Wonderful bassist, amazing musician, and great guy. And Mike Hyman is the drummer on this, and I've heard wonderful things about Mike. I have not played with Mike, so that's going to be something new element, that'll be fun for me. But I've heard wonderful things about him as not only a drummer but just musician in general and his great musicianship. So I'm really looking forward to the group. And then I don't know if I should mention surprise guest artist, if it's
Well,
okay.
we leave it
Uh,
as a surprise or not.
okay.
It's up to you.
Okay. Well, I'll leave it as a surprise. But Louisville local, who's a wonderful musician, and if you come to the show, you'll get to hear him as well, and a very good friend too. I've played with him a fair amount, through the years. So,
Well,
and
we've
certainly
had
known about his career.
We've had
Yeah.
Phil down for a show here for the Louisville Jazz
Okay.
Society, and Jeremy Allen's come and played here in Louisville a few times,
Yep.
and our audience knows Mike well. So
Okay.
this is a great band that's been put together here. So
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah.
So, what can the audience expect to hear at the show? Will there be a mix of standards, originals? What kind of stuff are we going to hear?
Yes, you pretty much hit it on the head. We'll do a mix of standard things. I don't know exactly what yet. We're still kind of formulating that, but I am going to bring some original music, and I'm sending it to the players actually right now. I've got some from several CDs that I've done through the years. One CD is called Radio Improved, which they can still get. One is called Four Steps Three, which I recorded here with some of my current jazz faculty, and one is called The Whirl. And so I'm going to pick some selections, probably two or three things from each of those, and we'll play some original music off of those three CDs. And I will have them with me at the show too if people are interested and still, I guess people still buy CDs.
I still do.
But yeah, okay. So if people do want them, I will have those available for sale at the show, so they can get them if they want to take the music home and they like it. I hope they do. But we are going to play a mixture of that, and then some new twists on some old standards that we'll probably do. Yeah.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Well, I'll finish it up here. I remember that Chip
Mhm.
O'Neill will be leading his quartet at the Cafe on Sunday, October 26th at 7 p.m. as part of the Louisville Jazz Society's Master Series. This is a chance to see one of the top jazz players in the nation here in Louisville, playing with a great band of regional and nationally known players. It's going to be a great show, and I'm really excited to hear you play.
Thank you, Glenn.